All right. Looks like we have a good group of people join, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. This is part two of our series on the state of data teams in 2025. And today we're going to go into the topic of BI and self-serve and what data leaders are thinking about on those topics, some of the trends that we're observing, and some of the challenges that teams are facing. Should be a really exciting discussion. I'm excited to introduce you to our panel today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Charles Schaefer. I lead product marketing at Hex. This session came from a survey that we did at the beginning of the year on the state of data teams. We reached out to every senior data person we knew and asked their opinion about how data and working with data is changing in 2025. We asked questions about how they're thinking about BI. We asked about AI. We asked about governance. We asked about their aspirations and goals for their team, and got some really interesting insights. Today, we're digging into the topic of BI and self-serve. Our last webinar was around kind of trends in AI. We're going to be doing another webinar next week on governance and how to ensure trust in data. So if you like what you see, please feel free to attend that one as well. We'd love to have you. Just in terms of how we're going to spend the time today, I'm going to give you just a really brief overview of some of the insights from our study. We're going to go into our panel discussion. We've got three great leaders in the data space here with us today. I'm going to try to turn over most of the time to them and let them discuss some of the things that they're noticing. I will do a little bit of a Hex pitch for you at the end. It wouldn't be a vendor-led webinar unless I tried to sell you what we have, but I'll keep that minimal, and we'll spend most of our time learning from our panel today. Um, so just a little bit of background. And by the way, if you're in the webinar, you can ask a question of us. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A. There should be a button in your Zoom for Q&A. You can type in a question there. We'll do our best to answer those questions live. I'll be monitoring that as we go through the content today, and we should have some time at the end as well to answer questions. If we can't get to all the questions, we can definitely follow up with you over email and things like that. But we'll do our best. So if you have questions for our panel here as you're hearing them speak about things that they're doing or specifics that you're curious about, please feel free to enter those in. Just a little background on the study. We reached out to over 2,000 data leaders, asked them all sorts of questions from big strategic questions like what's your greatest aspiration to really specific questions like what tools are you using. Got responses from a range of organizations, some 1, 2, 3 person teams, and some organizations that have hundreds of data people supporting thousands of stakeholders. One thing that was really interesting to me as we looked at kind of how data teams were thinking in 2025 is that data is becoming an increasingly strategic and senior function. 70% of our respondents were either on the C team or report into a C-level leader. So it seems like in this era with like the number of new technologies and trends in data that we are really seeing organizations recognize the strategic importance of data and thinking really deeply about how to enable data-driven insights for everyone. When we asked about self-service, the biggest thing that stood out to me was that um, there are really there's a lot of ambivalence around self-service right now among data teams. There were conflicting definitions about what it meant to enable self-serve. A lot of people said, it's been really difficult for us to enable this. Like we know it's a worthy goal, but the tools that we have haven't really met the goal. They've primarily resulted in us building a lot of dashboards, but we have kind of mixed feedback on how effective those dashboards really are, and a lot of frustration about the progress of technology to support self-serve. So I'm hoping we can get into some of those challenges and give you some more specifics about how people are thinking about that today in this session. This is our panel, and I'll do a really brief introduction of them, and then I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about what they're thinking about these days. We have Nick Ankerstad from Settle, We have Grace Finnan from Doximity and Balin Michael from Kaplan, all really senior data people, different types of roles in their organizations. I think they will represent a lot of diverse opinions about how organizations are thinking about this topic today. So, as a way of opening up our conversation, I'd love to hear from each of you on this topic. Nick, maybe I'll start with you. If you could just do a brief introduction to yourself, just to tell people who you are and where you came from, and then tell me, how you think about self-serve. Like, how does your team define self-serve with data today?
Yeah. Thanks, Charles. Probably good to sort of set the stage a little bit of the type of company I work for, because I think it sort of matters a lot when you think about where you're at. So Settle's about 80 to 100 employees. We're a startup. We primarily serve CPG companies. We have like a inventory management, a procurement and payments platform. We also have built-in working capital with that. And so our team is very tech forward, and also we are, uh, tend to be sort of like a younger company. And so self-service for us is very much this sort of like ability to get our stakeholders, and I don't just mean like business users and finance and marketing, but everybody in the company, the access to the data and the information that they need to do their job without too much involvement from my team. My team's relatively small, and there's only three of us. So that's sort of a key components of this, is like trying to drive that efficiency. And that is a big push for us when we talk about self-service.
Great. Thank you for that. Grace, I will turn to you next. Please introduce yourself and then tell us kind of how you're thinking about self-service at Doximity.
Yeah. Hey, so I'm Grace. I'm a senior data analyst at Doximity. Doximity was a company launched in 2010, and we're the country's largest network for medical professionals. So we provide telehealth productivity tools, curated medical news, and then social networking capabilities for our users. So I've been here for almost 4 years. We've got a pretty mature data organization here. Each team and product umbrella has their own data team. So it's not very centralized. Yeah, so for us, self-serve is really about data democratization. So we want to be able to, empower all of the non-data people, and in some cases, even data people who aren't as familiar with a certain product or aspect of the business, in a way that they're able to understand how they can get what they need, how to interpret and explain that, and then also be sure that, the information that they're getting is the most reliable and up-to-date sort of source of truth.
Gotcha. So Nick described a little bit more of a centralized organization where there's a small data team kind of supporting everyone, and you're describing a little bit more of a decentralized model where there's maybe
Hmm.
different pods or different groups of people supporting different parts of the business.
Right.
Awesome. Thanks for that detail. Um, Balin, over to you. Please introduce yourself, and then I'd love to hear kind of how you think about self-service at your organization.
Thanks, Charles. Everyone, my name is Balin. I'm currently a senior manager at Kaplan. I think folks are probably most familiar with Kaplan from test prep side. That's sort of just like one part of what we do in broader education company. So the part of the business that I support is actually we partner with universities to develop and deliver asynchronous enrichment programs for high schoolers. Um, and I'm actually like the entire data team for that division, so have a maybe a slightly different perspective. So it's sort of interesting being a team of one in a small silo of a rather large organization. I've been there almost 5 years, I think. And so for me, for our team, self-serve is really what it comes down to is it really ends up being a lot of building dashboards sort of as flexibly as possible so that our stakeholders who are not super technical can get answer as many of their questions as they can. But it's really trying to get, I guess, as much of that end to end built as possible.
Gotcha. Thank you. And you said you're one person data team for the test prep business. Are
No,
there,
not
oh,
the test prep side, a different
oh, sorry.
part of the
I misheard.
business. But
So how do you relate to like are there other folks in other parts of Kaplan that are maybe supporting different parts of the organization?
there are. It's kind of a separate. I don't like I report up through my own division. And yeah, so I'm a little
Gotcha.
disconnected from some of the other data teams more broadly in the organization. But I don't believe that there is like one fully centralized team. I think they're sort of a few different silos. I think I'm probably on the smaller side. And so like my division, I'd say they're probably 30 to 40 full-time employees that I'm working with.
Gotcha. Thanks for that detail. Yeah, that's actually a trend that I've noticed is fairly common with modern data teams is having like reporting into the business function that you support rather than being like part of some sort of central data team. Obviously, there's some cases of that as well, but I've noticed maybe a trend in customers that we work with in becoming kind of more aligned with like the specific KPIs for like a subset of the business that you support, which I think is really interesting to when we think about like data teams providing impact and like being able to like ultimately, I think as a data person myself, someone that's worked in a previous role as responsible for reporting and dashboards at an organization, like we're all kind of nerds that like wanted to find different ways of measuring things. But I think at the end of the day, it's meant to drive like these business decisions that should improve business outcomes. And so the idea of aligning a data team to like business goals and making sure you're reporting into that function is, I think, something that I'm seeing more and more as data teams become more strategic. I'm curious though, Nick and Grace, Balin kind of described like an important part of his output is like building dashboards. Like there's an artifact at the end of the line that like is really important for self-serve. Do you also think about it that way? Maybe Nick, starting with you, like is that like is that the ultimate thing you're trying to build, or is there something else that you kind of have in your vision when you're thinking about enabling stakeholders to understand data?
I think it's a part of a product portfolio, if you will. Dashboards have a purpose. I think it serves a specific need. There are people who like to log in and see something and see numbers, understand that, and that's part of their like routine. It's sort of like, some people like to read the news or the newspaper in the morning. They come in, they check the numbers and look at some stuff. I think that's definitely a thing. I've been pushing a little bit more towards meeting the stakeholders where they're at when it comes to that stuff. And so, like, instead of having a dashboard you have to log into and see what the numbers are today, can I just send that to you in a Slack message automatically and just have it show up in the same spot, right? There's sort of like an idea around like meeting the stakeholders where they're at. So that's like a piece of that, like insights generation. We also do a lot of like, moving data from one place to another. So like reverse ETLing and those types of things, I think is also like a big component of driving that self-serve, like meeting the customer or our stakeholder where they're at is you want to see it in Salesforce. You don't want to log into my BI tool. Okay, I'll send it to Salesforce. I just make sure that I govern the definitions and run through all those things. So yeah, I think it's a part, but I think there's a lot more to it.
Got it. Grace, is that consistent with how you think about it?
Yeah, I think so because for us, at least on the team that I'm on, we're not a client-facing team. We're just sort of in the background doing stuff. So our dashboards are really just for the product manager. We don't really have any sort of external stakeholders. But for those teams, certainly dashboarding is a big part of what they do for sure.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks for all the comments, folks. Really interesting to kind of hear some of the differences and how you're all thinking about self-serve, and it's pretty consistent with what I have heard from other customers as well. Some of the interesting stats that I noticed from our study that I thought I'd just kind of add to this conversation. I think people are mostly agreed that like self-serve is a good thing to do. 10 years ago, that might not have been the case. I think people might have said, I don't know if I want to give business users access to data. But in our study, we had 70% of our respondents say, this is a worthy goal. This is something worth working on. But 53% of them said, we're kind of unhappy. Like we have this BI platform, we're considering a change. It's not really working for us. And when I went and looked at like the qualitative responses that people sent us, they were actually like sort of emotionally charged. People saying, this is a huge mess and we're unhappy and the vendors aren't innovating and it's a love-hate relationship. And some people even saying like it's just a waste of time. And I think it's really interesting to see that reaction from data people who are also saying like this is worth working on. it says to me that there's something missing in the approach to self-serve, and maybe 2025 is when people start to rethink like the definition of these things, which is why I'm so interested in how data leaders are thinking about this topic. Let me ask you guys another question because I think a lot of the times self-serve comes down to this concept of democratization, as you said, Grace. But that is defined a lot by like what level of freedom are you going to give to your business stakeholders versus what level of control do you want to have as a data team? And the control, I think, comes from a really healthy place of like wanting to avoid wrong answers, wanting to ensure the data is trusted, wanting to make sure that there's like a consistent set of facts that people are making decisions on. But when too much control is implemented, then people start to feel trapped and they feel like their questions can't be answered. And sometimes that leads them to go outside of the governed system and go just do all their work in a spreadsheet or something like that. So I'm curious, maybe I'll start with you, Grace. What do you see as like the best handoffs between the data team and the stakeholders that you support?
Yeah, so we have a pretty extensive dimensional modeling system at Doximity. So that's sort of our, source of truth for reporting metrics and things like that. And that's what we build our Looker BI from. So I do think that I tend to find that if the question is really sort of complex, the stakeholders tend to ask a DA or someone to get the answer for them, even if the data is available for them to use, because I think, it is just a little bit intimidating. So even if the data is there and it's correct and reliable, and we all know that it's reliable, it's still sort of a barrier to entry sometimes where they may feel like it's a little bit too much to take on. But a lot of the time, if it's a more straightforward kind of question, we have a lot of trust in our dimensional models that they are the reliable source of truth data that answer is going to be correct if they go there for it.
Okay. So you're modeling a lot of the data into this semantic model, and that's kind of where you go to maybe certify the answers that users are getting from data. Um, and you're basically it sounds like you're describing if there's a harder question that isn't isn't served by some of the models that you've put in place, you expect the team to kind of escalate those questions to your team.
Right.
Gotcha. Cool, thank you. Balin, how do you think about this topic of, what the data team should be responsible for versus what do you want to enable the business stakeholders to do?
Yeah, I think I feel pretty similarly to Grace about it. I think I also get a lot of sort of even just sanity check questions of like, hey, I know this is where I'm supposed to go. Just want to, double, triple check that we're good. This is what I think it is before I go and use it somewhere else. But I think, ideally data team owns a lot of the definitions and how to calculate metrics and then is able to communicate that clearly to stakeholders.
Okay. And Nick, I'm curious about how you view this topic as well.
Yeah, I think of it as some sort of from the reverse side a little bit. Like we're trying, startups tend to try to be product led, and so a lot of things that impact my world happen sort of upstream. And so we launch a new product, we add a new feature, there are tables created. I need to do something with those. There are new objectives we're trying to hit, and so like a lot of that stakeholder interaction comes from more of we have a desire to do this with our product and evolve it and revise it. And I need to work with PMs, I need to work with engineers and developers to sort of like get the information that they're building and the knowledge that they have so that I can pretend like I know what they're talking about to a stakeholder that's asking a question of like, how many of this did we get? And so, I'm a big believer in sort of developer driven documentation components of things. And so, there's also trying to hit chat questions here too, like AI and stuff like that. And I think there's a bridge to there's sort of a nice way to do it is to have the developer led documentation happen, but make that easy for the developers by having suggestions and like AI as a part of that. So if you have to write a definition and I can just ingest that definition, guess what? My table is documented and I don't have to do a bunch of stuff. I just know what it is, and then I can surface that back up to my stakeholders downstream. So like I think there's like a nice thing for that, and we use some like fancy AI tooling for that. And that's a big piece for us is if I can make that experience easier for them. There's not this like big handoff where someone dumps a bunch of stuff. It's just like I click a button, ingest it, I get a little bit more information, and then I can pass that information along down to my stakeholders.
Gotcha. Okay, that's really interesting. I appreciate your thoughts on kind of how a dimensional model or semantic model can help power not just like the self-serve experience, but also like AI can further benefit from that. And we see that at Hex as well as when you have like previously kind of when semantic layers were being introduced to the market by tools like Looker, and there's some standalone semantic model products. The primary value prop was like governance and trust and kind of centralizing data definitions. And I think they're still used that way, but there's an additional benefit now that we have LLMs that people are trying to deploy on data where the LLM actually benefits a lot in terms of accuracy from having some sort of semantic definition. And it's at Hex, we've noticed that has really been the key, at least with current technology, to improving like an LLM's performance on our benchmarks, is making sure that there's a trusted set of semantic definitions that it has access to. Um, I want to get to my next question because I think it's related. I was asking kind of a little bit about the strategy of kind of where you see the handoffs between the data team and the business user, and the conversation kind of naturally went to, um, you know, we're defining semantic models, we're surfacing those as a place where users can go and self-serve and kind of answer questions on defined metrics. Um, are there other things that need to be in place to make sure that data is governed and trusted? I think semantic models go a long way to ensuring accuracy. Are there other things that you're doing right now to make sure that users can self-serve and have that democratized data experience, but not sacrifice the trust and governance in this really valuable asset in your data in your organization? Balin, I'd love to start with you for this question.
Sure. I guess when you're talking about trusted data, you're talking about the trust in the data that they are pulling, or the trust in like they'll then take that and do their own work on it, like that output is trusted. Is that
Yeah, well, you bring up an important point. Like there's a couple different ways to interpret it, right? So I think one is like making sure that we're not like sacrificing the security of data or giving the wrong people access to the wrong things, but also then like when someone gets an insight and then wants to make a decision on it, get consensus, in their organization about it. How do they make sure that like they know that the numbers are right and someone's not saying like I don't agree with that data point or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, I think on the it's more upstream part of it, I'm really the only one like building data models, querying data in our warehouse. So that's fairly self-contained. And like the only way that gets exposed is, through either like an ad hoc report that I would run or building dashboards either in like Hex or Tableau. And like the Tableau access is managed. We have like a centralized team that manages for like our whole enterprise. Um, so that is sort of like on them to make sure with manager approval that the folks who are requesting access get it. And I think usually we do. And then, I can always set specific permissions on it, individual dashboards. Sometimes there are some that are, we only want a couple people to see, and that has worked out pretty well for us. I think it's tougher what people will do once they take that information out of a dashboard or something. And honestly, I don't think I would have a good answer for making sure that it maybe is that information is used as the data producer intended. I'd love to know if anyone else has solved that one.
Okay, so good question to like ponder around like when someone gets an insight out of a dashboard or a report, like that that dashboard or report was built with the answer to a specific question in mind, maybe defined by some sort of business user requirement, but you don't really have control over what happens next. Like someone gets that insight and they might go take it and apply it to some unrelated use case, or they might go take it and export it, or there's
Right.
actions that people kind of take after the fact that might lead to just you not having the visibility into the
Mhm.
trust around the data. Got it. Nick, curious about your perspective on this topic.
Yeah, I think when we talk about like getting everybody to speak the same language and that like data governance components of things, I do think that that's an important piece. But to me, there are steps in the process where it's okay that we have sort of like divergent opinions. Usually that happens in sort of like we're going through how do we count something, for example, we're going through the process of that. And it is okay that we're not all speaking the same language for the time being. It's sort of like an iterative process of refining that. Because if I just came in and said, this is the way we're going to do things, I lose all those people. And they don't use my stuff and they create their own silos and do their own thing. So this whole like divergent things of like letting all the ideas flow free needs to happen first in the definition process. There is a path towards where like we drive towards convergence, and that's a roles and responsibilities thing usually. And that's when you go as a data person and say, hi, we're the data team. We're going to put this in our like we all agree that this is sort of like the definition we want. We're going to put this in our governed model and we're going to use that. It'll take me X amount of time to get this finished, but then I want everybody using that. You can use your pseudo ones for now, but then I want everybody using that. Are we all in agreement? I will do this work if you all commit to that. And then usually people say, absolutely. Can you also create this cool dashboard? Absolutely. We'll throw that in for free. And I think that's sort of like the creative process, and then sort of like driving that divergent thinking and then driving towards convergence is a big piece in what we do, and why this is like it isn't a technical challenge, it's a people challenge, and why I still feel good about that I will have a job even after all the AI stuff happens.
That's a great point, and I love that point of view. I often talk to data people who talk a lot about like the correctness of their answers, which I think is obvious. It's obviously important, but I don't hear as much people talking about like the importance of influence and the importance of like being able to assert some agency over the ways people work with data and the experiences they have. I think that's a crucial part to the success of data teams, and also a reason that I don't think AI is just going to replace all of us. That sort of requires human agency, even if our worlds are made much more efficient and automated, like from a technical perspective. Grace, how do you think about this issue?
Yeah, so we have, at least for our dimensional models, we've got YAML schemas that are sort of like the documentation and help document not only what's in this table, but how it relates to the other tables. So the structure and the relationships are all documented. And we have code owners for the repository that holds all of the dimensional models. I am one of them that, anytime a PR comes out for some new change, it gets reviewed by one of us to make sure just that everything stays high quality, everything's documented. We do have a team that is in charge of basically all of the universal metrics tables that a bunch of the teams use. So email engagement in general, um, you know, events engagement in general. So like anything that's sort of an upstream table that other teams will use, there is one team dedicated to that. And that's sort of all they do is make sure that our reporting metrics are accurate and that there's, no tracking issues and things like that. And so then each individual team, has their own tables for their own uses, but we also really try to make sure that those are as accurate as possible too. So I think, as you were saying, you can't really control what people do once they get a hold of your data. And sometimes we've had that happen where some other team is using this table we made, and we're like, wait, what? Wait, what are you doing with that? But the best you can do is just make sure that it's well documented. That way, everyone knows, okay, this is what this is supposed to be. You know, eh, that's all you can do from there.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you. These are all like great insights, and I hope our audience is finding the value. I'm seeing a lot of questions and comments in the chat, so I think people are really also experiencing a lot of the same issues that you all are talking about. I want to talk about one more thing, which is just where is all this going? We asked in our survey, like, what's the future of the front end of the data stack? And we got some indications that people are kind of tired of dashboards as the lone asset at the end of the, not that dashboards shouldn't exist, but that maybe they should be like a smaller part of the puzzle than they are now. We got some indications that people are looking for more integrated systems, systems that maybe combine the work of a data scientist and an analyst and a data engineer, because I think analysts are being asked to like do all of those tasks today, and so people want tools that make that easier. And I think just a lot of anticipation that things are changing very quickly. Obviously, like AI is on the top of all of our minds, and like we're expecting that to have a pretty big impact on the tools we all use. I think customers are at varying stages of, you know, either wanting to adopt those new tools right now, or planning out when they're going to be able to adopt them over the next year. But I want to hear your all perspectives on this. Like, what are you really excited about? What do you think, in 1 or 2 years, um, the ideal version of BI and self-service is going to look like? And Nick, I want to start with you for this one.
Okay. 2 years isn't a long time to like move an entire industry per se. So like I'm just gonna go with like where I think the like more advanced stuff would be because I think that's the more interesting pieces of this. I think Cameron put a interesting point of view in the chat, and I think that's a um, an area of exploration for many of us. This idea around like, can I just do less of the like reporting and analysis and have that more automated? Writing up and saying the variance was X, Y, and Z and stuff like that is, or look at a chart and decipher what it means and spitting that out into words that a layperson can read, I think is something that relatively easily I've seen LLMs can already do that. So I think that will be a continuous push. Is this like instead of just seeing a chart and a dashboard, you get a report that actually speaks to you what actions you should take and stuff like that. We've been exploring some things with that and seen that like it's actually pretty decent. Like it's a junior level analyst at this point. It is not like a senior level analyst, but it can do some stuff. And I think that's a continuous iteration of this like analyst sharing type of thing through an bot LLM type of thing. I think that's a big piece. And then the other piece I think that's going to continue is I think data gets more permeated and you ship data to other platforms becomes a continue that trend definitely continues.
Gotcha. Grace, love your perspective on this. Like, if you think about BI and self-service a couple years in the future, what are some of the things you're thinking you're going to see?
Yeah, I think for us, we're, actively exploring some ways that we can start leveraging AI for this. We have some teams doing like deep dives into different tools and tech that we want to use. Uh, One thing that we want to try doing is to semantically model the dimensional modeling ecosystem, so that, it can sort of support like a frequently asked question that right now would require a DA to have to kind of explain. Um, and we also want to try exploring like some self-serve tooling to enable some non-technical people to experiment with LLMs for like an MVP or a prototype. But generally, I think for AI, we want to kind of consider the tools and the functionality that they bring with as much intention as we have with like our current modeling infrastructure before AI, just because, garbage in, garbage out. And it's also that data analysts too, um, the value that they bring is sort of in asking the right questions and being able to, communicate those actionable insights where, an LLM might be pretty good at it now, but, it's always nice to have sort of the human touch for that too.
Yeah, that's great. I love to hear how you're thinking about AI. Obviously, it's at the top of all of our minds because we're all being told constantly about like every new tool that's going to transform our worlds that use AI. And I think it's really valuable for us to think about like the practical ways that's going to come to life for us. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Balin, I'd love to get your perspective on this as well.
Or yeah, I think a lot of similar themes to everyone else, but I think generally leveraging AI, I guess maybe the way I've tried to start thinking about it is for more personalized or ad hoc things. Maybe that gets offloaded in like a certain number of dashboards that maybe are built currently in like a flexible way to try and serve multiple purposes sort of don't exist as much in the future, but that you might have maybe a more static, like executive level thing that everyone agrees, like these are the top metrics for the quarter of the year, whatever that is, would still be in like a similar state as today, although hopefully like being pushed to where folks need it rather than having to have everyone log in. Um, and hopefully too, in some ways, giving more context to the data that maybe like business users are using in their other tools, whether that's a CRM or a email marketing platform, being able to like have that closer to where they're doing their work.
Yeah. I think the availability of context is a huge thing that I hear a lot of customers talk about as well. I think that's maybe the biggest thing that I don't see a lot of organizations adopted right now is, thinking about ways to explore data either through like visual interfaces or natural language systems. Like the systems haven't progressed broadly yet to the point that it's easy to incorporate new data or get context from something else that could help you answer a question. I think that's one of the things that's kind of held it back from broader business user adoption. But I think that's also something I'm seeing a lot of investment in right now. Okay, this has been great. I really appreciate all of your opinions. I want to get to Q&A in just a minute. First, I want you to allow me to give you 3 or 4 minutes of kind of hex related, kind of our point of view on this topic. You've heard from 3 different data leaders, varying sizes of team, different org structures, different challenges on how they're thinking about self-serve and some of the topics they're considering as the technology changes in the space. This is kind of our point of view on the topic. So, first of all, we think at Hex that BI has gotten to be a little bit too much of like a standalone tool set. And we think that the way organizations work with data, the dashboard or the report is a really important part of the puzzle, but it can't stand alone. It has to kind of exist in the context of everything else you need to do with data. We think that self-serve, likewise, is going to be most effective when the data team is the foundation. And there's a lot of products out there kind of selling on the idea that like this is something you can just give to your business users and they'll be effective at asking questions at data. People are starting to just naturally like upload CSVs to ChatGPT and ask for answers. And LLMs and new technology are getting pretty good at helping with those things, but we think like the broader context of what data means in an organization is really important for accuracy for those things. And the hard questions are always going to end up being escalated to the data team. So it's really important that tools and technologies make the data team effective and able to do their best work. And we also think that um, over the past 10, 15 years, organizations have kind of adopted mostly surface level insights in dashboards. Like it's rare to see a visualization or dashboard that goes beyond kind of what happened and goes into like why did it happen and what's next. And we think that more advanced analytics deserve a place in like the self-serve and BI workflow. So those are some of the things that we think are important. Ultimately, we think that there's a cycle of analytics that happens in every organization. This happens regardless of what tool you use. This is more of an organization and people thing where there's a data team that answers the really hard questions from data. They publish their insights to somewhere where those insights are curated and they kind of turn into a library of answers and content. And then people can go in and interact with those answers and explore the data and iterate on the data. And at some point they run into a wall and they have questions that the reports and the self-serve tools can't answer. And so they need a way to volley back to the data team and say, I need help. I need this more advanced answer. This cycle, I think, exists everywhere where there's a data team. And it can be a vicious cycle or it can be a virtuous cycle. If it's a vicious cycle, the process kind of breaks down at this point of volley back. And the data team feels like they kind of have to start over. And every time someone goes through this process, it leaves as kind of a one-off insight. And I've worked with companies that have, 20,000 dashboards that are all answers to one-off questions. If it's a virtuous cycle, this this volley back moment turns into a really seamless process where the organization can go through that cycle faster and faster and with more and more value and without creating thousands of one-off assets where the dashboards and models that exist in the organization can really compound in value and become a better way to kind of build trust and consensus around data. So that's what we think the North Star for data practices and self-serve is. I'm going to give you a brief demo of kind of what that looks like in Hex, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So in Hex, as in many different products that are used for analytics and data, um, you can produce what we call a data app, what a lot of people call a dashboard, that is a visual representation of the data. And this dashboard has visualizations, it has some numeric analysis, has some tables in it. One thing that is unique about Hex that I think is really important is that we can bring in more advanced analytics into these apps. So for example, here I have a revenue forecast of opportunity creation over time. And this isn't just something where we went and like ran a model and scored the data and are visualizing it. Like this is a live predictive model that is running under the covers in Hex, and the user can actually interact with it and control it. And that's because Hex has full Python capabilities out of the box. And so the end user can be interacting with something that sort of feels like a nice visual dashboard, but under the covers, we can be running very advanced predictive models. We have customers doing machine learning model training in Hex. We have customers doing like unstructured data classification for data science use cases in Hex. When a user does want to explore the data in more detail, though, they can click in and self-serve and answer their own questions. So for example, here we've got sort of a simple view that shows a breakdown of opportunity creation across different account segments over time. And the user can interact and maybe change the time horizon or change the metric. All of this is based on a semantic model. So the data definitions here are based on a semantic model that can either that can be brought in from whatever semantic model that you happen to support. And this is useful because it helps with the metric definitions or providing a dictionary of field names and when that data might be used that can be helpful for an end user that maybe doesn't have all the context of the best way to explore the data. And as we were saying earlier, like that semantic model is also like incredibly valuable for LLM driven analytics. So if I type in a question, like maybe say, show me the number of opportunities by stage name and segment, we can run that prompt against the semantic model that we have here, and the LLM knows which fields might be useful to use and what metrics might help with that analysis because the semantic model kind of helps drive accuracy in that question answering. And we even get a nice explanation. So we could continue to iterate here, and the user has these tools at their disposal to kind of answer their own questions with data. The last thing that's really important to us at Hex is, again, giving the business user a way to kind of escalate or volley back when they have that hard question that they need help from the data team to answer. So, for example, here, maybe as an end user, I might want some help, not just looking at kind of what this opportunity count has looked like in the past, but maybe I at my data analyst who happens to have the same name as me. Can you help me with a forecast of this data? And the analyst or the data worker who is building this can collaborate with that person within this experience. So if I was an analyst, I might be looking at it in this view. This is our notebook in Hex. And so everything that I just showed you in that app is powered by the cells in this notebook. It has the ability to create Python code, SQL, visualizations, spreadsheets, and the analyst might get a notification that someone asked a question, use that comment to kind of navigate to where in the workbook that question was asked, and then start there to kind of enhance the experience and kind of branch into that next question. So in this case, I brought in a profit forecast model to help forecast this data. I did a little select statement in SQL where I ran SQL against the forecast model I created in Python, and then I created a plot of the predicted data. This actually can all be powered by LLMs as well. I won't go into that right now. We covered it in the last session. And then it can be added back to the app just with quick drag and drop. So we don't have to like create in one place and then open up Streamlit and build our app and then publish somewhere else. It's all in one unified experience. And that's really what we mean by kind of closing the loop and allowing that cycle to be virtuous and allowing these assets to improve in the value they provide the organization. So that's a little bit about what we offer. It's really exciting to us, and we think it's aligned to some of the trends we talked about in this session. I want to go now into Q&A. So there's a bunch of different questions that have come through to the chat. So I'm going to do my best to read these off, and I'd love the team's feedback. I'm going to start with this question well, we already talked a little bit about Gen AI to facilitate self-service. So I think we've covered that, Matt, but let me know if you have another question about that. There's a question from Jacob. My question is around building single source of truth models. We have a central data team, but distributed analytics and business functions. What's the best approach to building enterprise dimensional models when you might have a lot of differences between business teams and how they leverage the data? Grace, you talked a little bit about building dimensional models at Doximity. I'm curious if you have a point of view on the best approach to building these models when there are maybe differences between different audiences and what their needs might be in questions that they ask.
Yeah, that's a good question. Because we hear our sort of central data team is the infra data team, so they're in charge of a lot of our, back-end tooling and things that we use as data analysts and engineers. But as far as, I talked about the team that does the universal dimensional models that are sort of data that everybody can use. So I'm not sure exactly the structure of this team. So like the analytics and business functions, I guess, are the ones, consuming those dimensional models. How we do it is we have those universal tables, but each individual team sort of builds their own on top of it. And for us, the data analyst is the one who does that. So we don't necessarily have just like a pure BI person creating those. So, I would say it never hurts to have a specialized other dimensional model built off of your other universal one that could feed a specific use case for a different team. If there are really a lot of differences between those business teams and it doesn't make sense to sort of try and cram a bunch of those cases into the same model, yeah, that would be my advice. But it's a little bit different of a circumstance than we have. So I'm not entirely sure.
Thanks for giving your
I hope
thoughts.
that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Curious, Grace, just as a follow-up question for you. You said, I don't want to interpret too much from what you said, but you said we don't have analysts that are like pure BI users. Could you just describe a little bit more about like the different tasks that your team is responsible for? So obviously part of it is like reporting, part of it is semantic modeling. Like what is kind of in scope for your data team?
Yeah. So we have business intelligence analysts, which is more of just like a pure BI analyst, but the data analyst is sort of a combination analyst, data scientist, and sometimes data engineer. We do also have data engineers that take over like the bulkier, meatier kind of engineering problems. And it does depend on the team as well. On my team, the DAs do a lot of DE heavy stuff, and on other teams, they don't. So it really depends on the product you're working on and how much of the work you're doing involves a lot of data pipelines, versus, more like client facing kind of ads, things like that, for instance. So yeah,
Great.
it's sort of a broad scope of responsibilities.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, Nick and Balin, do you are it sounds like Grace is describing a world where there's start analysts maybe are kind of expected to take on a few different tasks, like maybe some data science task, some BI type tasks, some that might be more traditionally assigned to like a data admin or something like that. Are you finding yourselves in a similar camp where you're kind of your the lines of kind of what define your role are blurring a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's the nature of the game in a lot of cases. I had a conversation with our ML engineering team, and it was just like we're very similar spaces, but just the like things we enjoy about work are very different.
Hmm.
So our ML engineer told me, he's like, well, I really want to work on the one core problem that's the most important thing to the company. And as a data person, like working in like my scope is basically all the way from ingestion, so ingesting things, storing it in the warehouse, all the way through like sitting in the meeting and saying like this is the action I recommend we take from what the numbers are saying. So like I have a pretty broad scope. But just like I enjoy like one day I'm in SQL, next time I'm in Hex, and then I'm in a dashboarding tool, then I'm, looking at database issues. Like it's a little bit all over. And I think that's a little bit of the attraction of like the data world is that like I don't know. I don't know what my day's gonna hold any given day of the week. It is very much all over the place.
Yeah, I would say my remit is pretty broad as well, and I have everything from handling ingestion, stuff like Fivetran, doing all the data transformations, managing the warehouse, and then all of the sort of like output as well. So yeah, depending on the day, the week can be focused a different part of that pipeline. And keeps it interesting. It's nice. And I like having like a full sort of sense of our business, at least on that team, having that visibility.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, so we've got a bunch of folks that love variety here, which I think is like an interesting asset of a data person that probably isn't in a lot of job descriptions, but sounds like it's important for the role. Anyone doing any AI natural language interfaces in Slack or have that scoped as a future project?
Yeah, I alluded to this earlier. We do a little bit um like at one point we used to have analysts that would just like here's the update, here's the metrics and report on those and put those in Slack because like I mentioned, not everybody goes to the BI tool, looks at things on a day-to-day basis and all that stuff. So just taking those sort of company updates and posting them. So we have a little bit of that. Also, there's a part of my role that's project management. So like, where are we at with things? It is a very annoying question to ask people. And we do have like project management tools. Those tools have a bunch of information in them. And we feed those into our warehouse. So I can actually take that and then summarize what everybody's working on and just be like, here's the summary of what everybody's got planned for the week. We can still talk through some of those things, but that's sort of a nice way that we've had it. And we do that. This is your sales pitch kind of like we do that through Hex. It's a very nice thing. You can read in SQL data from a structured database. You can do some stuff in Python, make some calls out to like Gemini, etc., and then you can have that summarized, and then you can push it back out through Slack, just all in like a Hex workflow.
I love it. Thank you. Anyone else doing anything in terms of like collaboration tools or Slack and kind of enabling AI through those platforms? Not yet. Okay. I've gives response to Cameron's question about like, is anyone doing that? And I have seen a couple customers aspire to do that. It's something we're actually working on at Hex. I think it's a really interesting use case. And I think that's a trend that we will see as the technology evolves. Um, there's one last question here that I'd love a quick answer from all of you on. It's kind of a complicated question. It feels like it could be a webinar in itself, but Cameron asked about like the differences between the centralized org structure and the more hybrid structure. It sounds like at his company, they are kind of trying to kind of come up with a hybrid structure where there's some embedded analysts in specific parts of the business, but there's also a central data team. Obviously, you guys all work for various sizes of data teams, so I don't know if it would make sense for your organizations to do that. But Grace, since maybe you're of this group, you have kind of the largest data remit, your team. Um, do you like how do you think about that topic? Do you have like central teams that support the decentralized analysts at Doximity?
Um, we have, as I was saying, our infra team is there. They support like every data team on all of the teams. As far as the tooling that we use and sort of making sure that we're all consistently, using the same tools. Um, so that definitely helps. I think being able to have like a consistency in the tooling between teams is really important. And again, with the dimensional models, just having a ground truth definition of this is what this thing is, that everyone can sort of get behind and know, so that when you expand out to other teams, you all sort of have you're on the same page and you are using the same definition of whatever it is that you're doing. Um, so I do think that having some team that sort of helps uh, more engineering type of functions, the tools that the analysts are going to use, I think having a central team to sort of keep those consistent across the other teams is really important.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Balin, I know you kind of see yourselves as a team of one, but if you did have like a central data team that's kind of supporting you, what are some of the things that would like be most helpful for them to provide to you?
Yeah, I think sort of a similar vein of tooling, maybe like best practices for documentation, testing, code review, those sorts of things. I think are probably would be very helpful to have standardized across like a broken up data team like that, as well as maybe like owning some of the infra or access to governance on like the warehouse itself. That might be nice to have centralized in a central team. I think it's but it's still very important to have those folks who are like embedded and closer to the functions that they're supporting to get sort of as much of the context there as they can.
Great, thank you. And Nick, is this something you've thought about as kind of decentralizing the team and having different people in different parts of the business, or you're not quite there yet?
I think I've lived through all those models in some way, shape, or form in prior jobs and stuff like that. And I think there's like the answer is always like it's somewhere in the middle. If you go full decentralization per se, then like you lose some of that like network effect or like coming together and people actually talking about the work and sort of being solo data person is a little tricky because you don't have that wall to bounce ideas off of. So I think there's sort of like that component. It's drawback of the fully decentralized model, and the fully centralized model is like you're so far away from the business, you're just talking to data people all the time, and that's a little tricky. So like you need to find the sort of happy medium where you're connected enough on the business side so that you have the context you need for those conversations, but also connected enough on the data side. So the answer to this is generally like a lot of data engineering tasks and those types of things are a little bit more behind the scenes, probably centralized, all that. The other ones is like it's going to depend a little bit on your company culture, like how far the spectrum you go. But I don't think you are fully centralized or fully decentralized. I think you have, some power users in the business, some analysts in on the data team.
Gotcha. Thank you all for your perspectives on that. I think that's a really meaty topic, and I appreciate getting each of you to weigh in. And you've all been generous with your time. We've gone a little over, so we can wrap there. I I really appreciate everyone attending this webinar. This has been great. I really appreciate the Nick and Balin and Grace, each of you for attending and providing your candid thoughts. Super valuable for me to hear what you as data leaders are thinking about when we talk about self-serve, and I think our audience really enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much for being generous with your time with us today. And if you're attending, we will send out an email as a follow-up with a recording to this webinar and an invite to our next session next week. So thanks so much, everyone, for attending, and I hope you have a great day.